right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you, Diversitech, for having us today. Really excited about this panel, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. She kind of took a little bit of my steam because I was going to say a little bit about what this panel is about, so I guess we can get right into it. But before we get into the panel, we'd love to just, start by challenging a narrative we've all heard. Start with some data, right? 89% of senior HR leaders expect AI to reshape jobs in 2026. Another statistic that I thought was interesting as well is workers with AI skills command 56% wage premiums over peers in identical roles. Without these skills, up 25% for just 1 year prior. So question for the panelists, is the real competition between humans versus AI or professionals who understand AI versus those who don't? Any order?
Sure, I'll start. So I think that the answer is kind of in the question in the sense that, yes, it's AI versus humans, but I want to take it to a more meta level, which is that we're all on an individual journey. And so to me, the real question is, it's your current mindset versus the mindset you need to have for the future, right? So how are you thinking about, leveling up and upskilling to develop fluency with these AI tools, instead of taking the approach of having an aversion to learning how to use the tools? Because we could be here talking about, the ethical considerations and all those kinds of things, but the truth is that the train already left the station. So I think what's in our best interest is developing an understanding, and in order to get to the point of developing an understanding, we need a mindset shift among ourselves to embrace the change that is being thrust upon us if we really think about it, right? Because whether you work for a company or you're working for yourself, you can likely use these tools to benefit you. And so it's really about changing your mindset so that you can embrace the change and the new technology that's coming down the pipes, so you can take full advantage of them and, like the panel says, supercharge your impact.
No, make sure I can be heard. No, I completely agree. I'll keep it quick, but one thing I think is, instead of thinking of replacement, we really need to be thinking of leverage, right? So like you said, AI is something that's here to stay. It already exists, right? And so if it's a question of whether or not we can outcompete it or outperform, I think you have that folklore of John Henry, right? And it's really like a technical kind of example of this, where maybe there are areas that we can compete, but really the question is, are you gonna use that to be competitive against other people? Right? And so I think it's more of, how can we incorporate this into our workflows? Because if we don't, the other people we compete against will, and you won't be able to be competitive in a modern world.
Yeah, I'll just add really quickly. I think the John Henry metaphor is a great one, in that you're not competing with AI. Humans and AI are doing two different things. And so if you keep yourself in the mindset that you're competing with AI, you will lose, because you're fighting a fight that you are not equipped to do. The AI cannot replace that human judgment, that context, all of those things. So the people who succeed understand that very early on and very quickly, and are understanding how they can use the AI to leverage their expertise and all of the things that they do. And that will make a difference between those who do that and those who don't. But against the technical skills of AI, we're far surpassed in many areas already. So trying to keep up in that area is not going to really make any sense.
Thank you for that. My next question is for Raymond, right? Raymond, you're Intuit, you're a senior research scientist, sorry about that. What are the areas where AI clearly outperforms humans today, and where does it still fall short, in your opinion?
No, that's a great question. I like to kind of think of it in three particular areas where AI outperforms, right? And so it outperforms when you think of speed, scale, as well as precision, right? So when we say speed, for example, I like to read, but I cannot read 10,000 pages in a couple of seconds, but AI can, right? And so it's not even a question of, can we compete with that, or if we should. AI is capable of being able to do something that would take us significant amount of times as human beings, and can do it very quickly. Data synthesis being one of those things. Another is scale. So not only can it read 10,000 pages in a couple of seconds, but it can also think through multiple scenarios very quickly, right? things that the human mind is just not capable of doing. And then in regards to precision, AI doesn't get tired, right? So the way it starts on task 1, as long as you keep it plugged into the wall, it's gonna do the same thing on task 1,000. But if you ask me to do something after about 12 hours, if I don't have something to eat and sleep, what I do on task 1,000 is gonna look very different than task number 1, right? And so I think we have to almost think just kind of how you would think about a mechanical system, right? It's gonna be able to do the things without having the same costs that we have. So if it's capable of building, thinking, and doing all of these things, the big question is, well, where do we as human beings still fit in this? And I think it's important to recognize that we still exist in a very human world, so we're solving very human problems. And so that is the advantage that we have to leverage. So one thing that AI cannot do is take accountability. It can't take responsibility. It can't manage the ethical weight and judgment. That is something that human beings can do, right? At Intuit, it's one of the things that we have as the core of like our AI responsibility, is thinking about how do we take the responsibility of our decisions. So you need a human behind that. And number 2, it's also context. So like I said, we're dealing with human problems. Even though AI can think through problems, it can also solve a lot as well as build things, it still needs a human being to identify what problems are worth solving and what's worth building. And that only comes from someone who has to deal with and live in an actual world where those decisions have an impact, right? For us, it's not just a number that it's creating, right? That means that's actual lives, that's actual food, whatever. And so we provide the context, and I think as we move forward, human beings really need to focus on how do we think about context as well as responsibility.
That's a great perspective. So we're clear that AI is not taking anyone's jobs overnight. I want to just kind of level set on the next set of questions for Evol. So, as an engineer, a VP of engineering, when you're thinking about how you're implementing roles for engineers, product leaders, technologists, how does AI become embedded in everyday workflows?
It truly depends on the stage that your company is at, wherever you're working. So if you think you're somewhere mid-stage, somewhere in the messy middle, you've got roughly 500 employees. Let's say that your product design and engineering org are a couple hundred people, right? The momentum it takes for that team to adapt and evolve workflows, it's gonna take a lot of effort to move those humans along. And as the saying goes, you could go fast alone, sure, but you're gonna go further together, right? So you gotta make sure that you're trying to move everybody along and establish a new baseline of competency or fluency with these tools. The other thing to realize is that AI now blurs the lines between, who's a product manager, who's a product designer, who's an engineer, and what those individuals in those roles are capable of doing. Another thing to consider is that as leaders who might have been removed from their editors for a few years, where a majority of your responsibility is, helping others to do their IC work, you can now start to tinker and explore ideas. You can, like Raymond was saying, use AI to gather context quickly so you can maintain a more intimate relationship with the work that your teams are doing. And so that blurs the lines, and you got to start to think about and exercise human judgment to say, what is the best use of my time as a leader? As a designer, what's the best use of my time? Should I be in Git and in the code base with the engineers? How do we collaborate going forward? And I'll give you a very practical example. A lot of product design and engineering teams work in a way where a designer, a product owner, or a product manager might say what to build and why to build it. A designer might show you what it looks like with a mock. And then an engineer takes that mock and say, okay, now let me convert this into code that you can interact with and persist things. But what happens if we're now in a world where a designer can use natural language to talk to that thing that's already built and make design improvements to it? What happens if an engineer can now take that design mock that's in Figma and say, I'm gonna use Claude with the MCP server for Figma, and I'm gonna make changes to these designs based on a conversation we had in a meeting 20 minutes ago. So you're already starting to see how the lines of these roles are being blurred, and we're gonna have to now define new ways of working together where we're essentially playing in each other's sandbox. And it's gonna be chaotic for a little while, but I think it's really important for us to think about how our roles can shift and how they can be more fluid, and focus on, the output and the outcomes we care about, and be less precious about the boundaries of our roles going forward.
Oh, thank you for that. My next question is for you, Monk. Which human skills, judgment, creativity, ethics, leadership, become more valuable in an AI-powered workplace?
Yeah, I think the theme that we're talking about judgment being so important, I think that is incredibly important in the work that you're going to be able to do. What we do at First Street is we train professionals and organizations in how to use AI in their everyday work, and we do it across industries. So fashion design students, elementary school teachers, professors. I have a group of biologists that I'm doing through a training course right now. And the thing that stays the same across all of them is whatever the AI is creating, you have to turn your years of experience into the asset that's going into this equation. And the people who pick up on it and who become really dangerous, I love people who come in who are like, I'm close to retirement. Here's another, technological wave I have to learn. I'm really not in here for it. And I'm always really excited to speak to them because I'm like, I'm going to make you the most dangerous person in the room because you've gone through all the blood and sweat and tears of figuring out how to do this manually. And when you understand that AI is just the execution lever, it's just the execution. You are still the designer, you are still the composer, you are still doing all of these different things. I think one change that I tell people to do now is because it was so difficult to do things in the past, you were taught to specialize. You should really get really deep and know this thing very deeply. And I tell people now you should have more breadth because now you don't have to go out and do the execution yourself. AI can do it. So being someone who can do things across the workflow is more important than someone who just, I really know how to code in Claude and that's all I can do. I really know how to do this and that's all I can do. I tell people all the time, be creative. We'll have business bankers and I'll say, let's get on Midjourney and create your favorite album cover because I want you to learn how to make images because that's important for the work that you do. Before you never thought of it because it was too difficult, you left that to design, you left that to that group, but now you have the ability to do that and people who can create a project from beginning to end with all of the aspects in it and keeping all that context in mind and saying, I'm gonna take these notes, turn it into an infographic, turn it into a 5-minute podcast, turn it into an executive summary, all to give to my executive director for this upcoming meeting is much more important than just being super specific in one thing. So it's taking all of that judgment and context and just using AI as a lever to execute that for you.
Thank you. For Raymond, I would love to piggyback off of his questions. From the technical perspective, how does one become AI augmented? How do you augment AI?
No, I think this is a good question. And I think it's important because I think it's a question that we're all kind of asking ourselves right now, right? I think everyone has their own anxiety around AI and the question of where we're going to fit in. And then one of the stances of Intuit is our approach around AI is that we think of it as enhancing our human talent, not replacing it, right? And so the idea is that we understand that the decisions that we're making, they're important, they have real consequences. And so we understand that people will play a role within that. And so we can't be foolhardy to just move without that. From more of a practical standpoint, I think it's a question of, one, how we change our perspective when we talk about AI and how we approach it. So my first thought is it should move from a question of fear and move to a question of curiosity, right? It should never be like, how is it going to replace me, but more so, how can I leverage this? What can I do that's more, right? Second, I think you have to move from an idea of drudgery to thinking more about abstraction, right? And so if anyone can build an app, right, the question doesn't move from how well can I build an app, how well can I code, it's more of a question of how do I know what apps people need, what features are important, right? It's thinking less about yourself as a cog in the machine and more as someone who's a director of the machine, right? If I had an entire army of people working for me or working with me, I now have to think at a higher abstraction level of like, well, what do I actually want them to do? What is worth pursuing? And then finally, I think we also have to think about it, for you to be an AI augmented technologist, right, to kind of sit in this role, you also have to think about responsibility, and accountability. So understand that, yes, I can tell Claude to go do something. I can tell my agents to build something. However, I need to also understand that there will be consequences for the decisions that they make, right? And because until we can somehow embed accountability within a model, right, it's a proxy of you. So someone's gonna take that responsibility and it's gonna be you. So those are really the three things that I think as of now we really need to focus on. And I'll just add one little quick piece. I've noticed a trend where there are technical skills that people are beginning to drop, right? Because we're kind of like, hey, it's not that important that I know how to code because I can just ask, a model to do the coding for me. But you still need to provide oversight. I think it's very myopic of us, right, to not think about the deeper questions, right? You still have to have an understanding. You need to understand, is this correct? I need to understand that, like, if I implement this, what will happen? And you won't know that if you can't read the code, if you can't do the critical thinking. So I actually put emphasis on, I think, understanding, right, and that critical thinking part and the technical skills.
You know, to piggyback off of what you're saying, Raymond, we're obviously responsible for the inputs to AI systems. We're also responsible for the outputs from AI systems. And what that says to me is that subject matter experts are going to be even more valuable in the future with AI tools. And as we think about folks who are, recent college grads trying to enter the workforce and having challenges finding opportunities now, that's something that I'm personally concerned with for folks who are at the start of their journeys. But for all of you who already have experience, AI makes y'all way more dangerous, way more powerful, and gives y'all a great lever. So whatever your area of subject matter expertise is, you can start to think about what problems can I personally solve, whether for myself or for my community, and just leverage AI to solve those problems, because we're all now problem solvers. And essentially the definition of being an engineer is being a problem solver. So technically you can almost call yourself an engineer, and no one can debate you on that, because you can now use tools around you to solve problems for yourself or for your community.
No, that's some good insight. And one thing I would like to touch on as well is that, as we know, like, a tool will come out today and then another version will come out tomorrow. So with the speed of AI, my question goes back to you, right? Is that it's getting to a point to where we're building tools, they're moving fast. Now you're working at a company where there's like a lot of regulatory requirements and stuff. So like, how is AI changing the speed of innovation and product development inside organizations? Like, what are you seeing?
The change is different for everybody. So I can actually use you as an example, because you're someone who used to work for a very large, publicly traded corporation, and now you work for yourself.
Right.
And you have used AI to solve some of your own problems, and you can move at the speed of thought.
Right.
But for me, being the VP of Eng at a company where I'm overseeing the work of almost 200 engineers, it's different, because like I said earlier, I have to make sure that everybody is moving along, that everybody is developing fluency in these AI tools. And that just takes time, because there's communication overhead, there's collaboration overhead, there are different personalities to deal with. And if any of y'all are familiar with the adoption curve, you know that you're gonna have your early adopters and your super users, and you're gonna have your laggards, right? But what are you gonna do? Be like Block and lay off 40% of people? Or do you find ways to help them to upskill so they can actually drive more value for the business? Because AI is a lever, it shouldn't be considered a replacement. So in my opinion, they don't necessarily have justification for what we're seeing right now. I think Meta recently said they're laying off 20% of staff.
20%.
I feel like there are opportunities for everybody to upskill, and I always believe in human capital. And so I think that everybody is more than capable of learning these tools, because the tools can teach you how to use them. So as far as I'm concerned, the rate at which you can move really depends on the ecosystem that you're in. Are you moving by yourself? Are you moving with a small group where y'all are basically on the same level? Or do you actually have a large team where it just takes more time and effort and coordination to build that momentum? And so that's basically the driver for me. It's recognizing, how many human touch points do I need to have to bring about the change that I'm trying to see? And for me, dealing with a large team, it means I've got to be patient and got to make sure that I foster alignment among my team as we make progress.
Thank you for that. And I want to take this one back to you, Raymond, because speed is incredible, but without guardrails, it can be detrimental to a company, right? So what responsibilities do technologists have when building AI systems that can scale bias or influence major decisions?
Oh, man. We were talking about this earlier, where we both work in areas where regulation is critical, right? Especially when you're dealing with other people's money. You have to understand that there's a weight of the decisions that we make, and if we make mistakes, it has real consequences for real people, their families, their employees. And so even though we're using these tools, right, it goes back to us saying that we hold the full responsibility, right? That's where it's going to come back. So I think, one, we have to think about AI governance, right? And that's always a priority. One thing that we have often seen within history is that technology moves faster than regulation and the law, right? And so we want to be ahead of that, right? Instead of just relying on solely, what is legally required, I think we also have to think about morally, right? What are the consequences? And so that's something that we want to get out in front. We also need to put up the protections, think about what those guardrails will be. So, we have AI governance committees, we do internal reviews, we also do employee trainings, right? And so knowing that you're in a world that's shifting so quickly, it is your responsibility to make sure that you try to keep up. Because if you do something, there is no saying, oops, and then pointing at the computer, right? It's gonna be you who's gonna be held responsible. In addition to that, I also think we have one other big thing is, and this goes back to that critical thinking part, we have to think about how we're gonna anticipate the consequences of the decisions, right? So if we ask something to do something, you can even leverage AI to help you with thinking through this, but it is something that we have to ask, and it's something that we have to think of, and on top of that, we also have to weigh those kind of decisions ourselves, right? As a human being, only I can carry and feel the weight of a moral decision. The computer cannot.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to ask you this question next month because I know you're working with a lot of different organizations. I know I met you last year, and the goal is to you're teaching other organizations how to leverage AI tools effectively. So from your perspective on other industries here, right? Because they both work for highly regulatory environment companies. What are you seeing that our companies are doing to prepare their teams for an AI-enabled workforce? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think most companies are not doing it well. I think regardless of size, there is, I see a lot of, we got you guys ChatGPT, go out and be merry, and see what you can do, or we're too big for that, and so we're gonna kind of really bottleneck where the innovation comes from, and that doesn't really work as well. The things that really work, or when we come in and we'll talk to them about doing corporate training and everything, and everyone's vision of corporate training is sitting in a room half day and you're watching PowerPoints talking through the theory of AI and all of that. And I think the most important thing for organizations when we do it and what we've seen that works well is you have to connect it to the real work very quickly and often. And you're just giving examples of how you can do this in your everyday work and how it can amplify the things that you're doing. And then having that environment where you're able to experiment without worry, kind of where you can figure some things out, because the people on the front lines are the ones who will find the most effective uses. They'll find the best use cases. Those super users will be the ones who are quietly doing a bunch of work that you didn't realize this is where all the knowledge is. But to that end, I think the thing that companies have to think through more is the human aspect of it, because it's one thing to say we want to use AI. I think somebody brought up, to triple our output. As an employee who's working there, what do I get for tripling my output? What is my incentive for tripling my output? I'm still getting paid the same amount of money. You're probably just going to give me triple work, so because you've tripled the output. So what are we redirecting that time, energy? Where should we be putting that leadership? What should we be doing with the fact that now AI handles customer support at a very high level? Now AI handles this at a very high level. So now what do we do with the people who were there? is a thing that I think companies haven't thought through very well, and we try and work with them to kind of sit through that very human aspect of this transition.
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask you this next question too, because I'm trying to think like 5 years from now, there's going to be a delta of like 78 million jobs that are going to, well, 92 million that are going to be displaced by 2030, right? So for the people here that are leveraging AI, like what do you think the next generation should focus on? What skills should they start focusing on now to be better prepared?
Yeah, I think to the point that Evol made as far as people coming out in their careers now, I think it's very difficult because you haven't built up that portfolio of things that you've done, things that you've experienced and all of that. I think if we're going 5 years into the future, there's going to be 1 million AI credentials. There's going to be 1 million certificates. Take this one, take that one. We have all these different things. I think you're going to have to be able to have a portfolio of things that you've done with AI. I built this app. I solved this very specific problem. I did these things, which before would have been really tedious to just create an app that I'm just going to put on the side in case anybody asks me, do I know how to make apps? That's a lot of effort and work to put into something. But now, if you're trying to move careers, you're trying to move into more leadership roles, you're trying to do things, or start your own business or be a part of something that's going on, just being able to show these are things I've actually created, I've actually done, is going to be incredibly important. And being able to demonstrate your ability to bring your judgment into things. I came up in the creative space and spent a lot of time in marketing, and one of the things that I really appreciate from that is if you're in the creative space and you want to be a titan in that space, you have to develop taste. Taste is extremely important. You're going to museums, you're watching ads, you're watching movies, you're developing the eye to know what is good and what is not good. That's going to be extremely important in this world where if AI can make 50 different responses, which one is the right one? It's the taste. It's you looking at it and saying, that's it. That captures the context. That speaks to the customer. That is the brand voice. All of these things that you need to develop and continue to do. So AI may make it easy for you to decide, I don't really need to do that. It's just going to create these things, but pushing yourself to, hey, if this is the world I want to be in, study the greats, study the people who are doing big things, and continue to develop that taste, because there will be a point very quickly where it's going to be, hey, the AI can do all these things. I just need somebody who can tell me that's the one, and I'll put my name on it. That's the one that you're going to do. That's the plan. That's the business strategy. That's the marketing campaign. Move forward with that. Who has the taste to put that final decision in?
That's a great answer. I will ask Evol if you can expand on this too, because you are a leader at Betterment, overseeing VP of Engineering, but also Director of Innovation at the BERG. So you host a lot of panels, you work with a lot of entrepreneurs. So what are your thoughts on this topic?
I think the future belongs to the people who believe that because AI is unavoidable, they're going to get good at AI, but they're also going to continue to invest in their EQ. I think that the two constants are, we're going to have to deal with change, so we're going to need to be adaptable. And the second one is we're going to have to continue to deal with humans because we live on planet Earth. So how about just being good at both of those things? Over the course of my career, what I observe with a lot of technologists is they focus heavily on being better at the tech than everybody else around them. And one of the things I learned pretty early is that the tech was evolving so quickly and the rate of change was only increasing that I'm like, what's going to be a constant through time? And I made the pivot a decade ago to get into engineering leadership because leading people was always a strength of mine. I captained sports teams in high school. And so seeing that through line from then till now feels pretty prescient, but I feel like these are skills that everybody can develop, right? And if you think about it, ultimately, even an individual contributor is going to need to be leading, a group of agents. Everybody's going to need to be a leader in some shape or form. So truly developing competency with AI tools, developing fluency, but also focusing on the EQ aspect. So that means not just going into your place of work and saying, I just want to do my job and go home, right? You got to build those relationships. I know there are lots of folks right now who are on the I want to work remotely train, but I can tell you that the value of working in person is going to increase going forward. We saw the pivot coming out of the pandemic where folks are going from working fully remotely to going back to office. We see the RTO headlines, and it went from, all right, come in 3 days a week to come in 4 days a week to some companies pushing folks to be back in office 5 days a week. And I can tell you as someone with, a family and 2 young kids that it would be nice to have the time flexibility to just work from home and spend more time with my kids, but I also know the value of being face-to-face with my coworkers and building those relationships. Because if we talk about things like mentorship and sponsorship, someone can't sponsor you if they don't know you. They can't sponsor if they don't see how you operate and can read your body language and understand the things that you're saying and the things you're not saying, right? So really focusing on the AI, getting really proficient with AI, but also focusing on the EQ aspect, I think is going to be super valuable going forward. And the last tidbit I'll share is that if you're someone at the start of your journey, I don't want y'all to leave the room and feel like we're saying, you should pack it up because it's impossible to enter the workforce. I said AI and EQ. A lot of the people who have the EQ or further along in the journey, they'll probably need your help to develop competency with the AI. So make that your superpower early. You be the one to adapt to the AI tools that you can teach it to other people while you start to develop the lived experience to then grow your EQ.
I like that. Just before I check, KB, am I good for another question? All right, perfect. Oh, we're doing Q&A? Oh, I didn't even know. Oh, well, I'm gonna ask one more question and then we can go into Q&A. Oh, perfect, I didn't even know that, that's great. All right, so this is my last question until then we can go to Q&A. So I guess, Mark, I can start with you and we can just go down the panel. I wanna get everyone's perspective on this. Okay, going back to 5 years from now, what will separate technologists who thrive and those who fall behind in this space, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think intentionality. I think it's being intentional with what you're putting your time into and what you're developing over this period of time. I think the EQ point is incredibly prescient. It's being intentional about understanding people, understanding change, understanding how to work with individuals while learning AI and all the different tools. I think the difference for folks will be there will be a group of people who waited till their job mandated that they learned it, who waited until you had to, kind of figure out this new tool. And then there's other people who are playing around with things, trying things out, explaining it to other individuals, explaining it to coworkers, and just that explaining it process is incredibly powerful and helpful for you because this is going to constantly happen, right? I prepare a presentation for a group of people, and in the presentation I'm doing a workaround for something because I'm like, oh, Claude can't do this thing, and then someone in the group is like, it can. It just came out last week, and so the change is always going to happen. So you're always going to have to continue working on things. So being intentional about saying, hey, this is how it's going to be, so how am I going to continue building my skills in that area will be the difference.
And
Well, yeah. No, it's funny. We were just talking about this in the back, right, about how quickly the technology is changing. And so when you ask 5 years from now, I'm like, I don't even know what to tell you about 5 months from now, right? Or even 5 weeks, it'll be so differently. But, there's a quote that plays in my mind constantly as I think about AI and the changes that we're going through now. And it's, at times like this, there have always been times like this. And so I think it's important that we reflect back and look at history, right? Because technological change is not new, it's constant. But what's important is we've seen how humanity and people have risen every time that the change has occurred. My background is mathematics, and so I always laugh and I look back and I think about, as a child, my teacher told me you need to learn how to do, this arithmetic because you won't walk around with a calculator in your pocket all the time. The joke's on them, right? But you ask, well, now that I have access to this tool, does it make my mathematics skills any less relevant, right? Has mathematics become irrelevant? And the reality is no, it's become even more relevant, right? It's because of these tools that we're now able to ask more important questions. We're able to do more. We've risen to a higher level of thinking. And so I think taking that approach of like staying curious, right? And thinking as we have these new tools that allow us to solve one thing, we really need to stay curious and start asking ourselves, all right, so now what? What are the remaining problems? And for as long as I've been alive, there's always going to be another problem.
Absolutely. I want to leave y'all with 4 words: initiative, experiences, intuition, taste. You got to take initiative to learn the tools. You got to live some life to know what to do with the tools. And then once you've lived some life from your experiences, you start to develop intuition. And then from that intuition, you're also going to develop taste, which is something Monk touched on, right? When AI can give you 10 different ways of approaching solving a single problem, how do you know which is the best one to choose? The person who's experienced 5 of those 10 solutions already could say, yeah, we're not trying any of those 5 because those all suck. I'm going to try the 6th one. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to try the 7th and the 8th and the 9th until I get to the one that's the best solution. So it's taking the initiative, living some life, like actually going outside, touching grass, having some experiences, not just staying behind a screen, developing the intuition, and then your taste develops over time that you now get better at making decisions from the plethora of options that AI provides for us all.
Those are all great points. And just for me, like he mentioned before, I worked for a large company, worked at Meta for 8 years, leading teams in North America and Europe. And 2024 decided to go full-time for myself. And I'm like, damn, this is scary. But I wasn't that scared because while I was there, I was working with AI research scientists, building out AI platforms, using it in real time. So I was like, I'm just gonna bet on myself and use these tools to see if I can, train these tools the way I was training in like my team that I supported. And the one thing I'm gonna leave you with is, I think you mentioned being curious. That is something that you should always leverage when you're leveraging these tools, because you never know how far it can go. And with these new updates that are happening every so often, you'd be surprised at what you can build. One thing earlier today, Justin brought up, he's sitting there in the front, we talked about, like, Evol was like, oh man, there's a lot, like you talk about analysis paralysis, having agents running in parallel, meaning that a ton of agents are working together, so which is the right solution? But once you have like system thinking, understanding how the structure works, anything is possible. So those are the type of things that I would think that are important as you're starting to build, because I've built my own platform that probably cost like $250,000, I'm not even lying, because I did the numbers, I'm like, man, I saved so much money building a platform for myself, and I looked at my partner, I was like, yo, this is really happening, and I'm actually making money off of it. So I'm here on this stage today, 2 years removed from working full time, leveraging these platforms for myself, and it's still growing. I have like meeting of the minds with Evol and other people in our nonprofit, and that's how I'm like working. So I think another thing too is just going to meetups, staying part of those Facebook groups. I think those are really important as well. But yeah, I'll pause there. I know we have questions. I don't want to hog up too much time.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
Hi, it's Chinadu. One, thank you guys all for speaking, especially on such a topic, and seeing Black men speak in this way is amazing to me. I wanted to understand from all of you guys, now that AI makes it that employees will have a lot more accountability inside of big organizations, right? You can tell because of AI who's productive. When those employees start to create the AI systems to help them with their job, how will they be able to take those systems that they've built, which is for their job, to other places? What do you recommend they do so that they're able to port their knowledge of building these agents, which are essentially property of the company they built it for, to the next place?
I'll give you a literal example that is not AI related. So in my previous job, one of the things I did was rewrite our career ladder a few times because I wanted to get as close to objective as possible for people to benchmark their performance. And then when I joined Betterment, it's something that I partnered with a couple folks who had the lived experience at Betterment to rewrite their career ladder. And that's something where I couldn't take the IP from my previous company to bring it over to the new company, but it's still up here. So because AI allows you to move at the speed of thought, anything that you've done before you can likely do again, right? So I wouldn't be worried about remembering the exact thing that you did with great specificity, but if you essentially know this is the problem I had, this is how I approach solving it, your mental algorithm will be good enough for you to port those solutions to another company, because what you don't want to do is steal that company's IP when you built the thing on their laptops, right? Don't do that. But you can move to a different company, or if you're doing something for yourself, trust that that experience now makes you a subject matter expert so you can deploy that knowledge to solving problems with AI at lightning speed.
That's a great point. And one thing I would recommend too for people that are working full-time jobs that have to do performance reviews, those things that you're writing, save that, right? Because you can leverage that for the next company on what you've built and then leveraging AI to help rebuild it again. So that's a great question, but I feel like you just have to be smart about it. Like, I'm not saying steal your company's data, but if you're writing your performance reviews, that's your resume. So that should go with you anywhere you go, you know? So making sure that feedback stays with you and then you can do it again. So let's pause with that.
I think we have time for one more question, if anybody has. Oh, we got way in the back. You're going to maybe have to meet me halfway, good sir. Yeah, there we go. We're making it happen. We got some energy on this afternoon.
Hey, I'm Aziz. I'm a software engineer. I'm curious, with using AI tools, like you can, I get the urge to just build a bunch of different tools and systems, sometimes that are like not actually solving the problem that I care about, but maybe it's like something off to the side. How do you make sure that like when you decide what you're gonna build, it's actually not something that you're just drowning your time in, if that makes sense? Does that make sense? Like where it's like, okay, now I'm building some like, I don't know, my own like, I don't know, what's a good example? Hotel collector or whatever, like it's pretty much rebuilding the wheel instead of like solving a real problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I think the first thing I would say is there's nothing wrong with tinkering. And I think there's a lot of value that happens where you're just messing around and just seeing, I made this thing that has no ulterior value or anything at this point. Because you'll be surprised in 6 months, the process you went through to make that helped you make this other thing. Or because you did this thing, you know that that's not really possible when somebody brings up this other point of something that they're trying to make. Tinkering is incredibly valuable. I think our society values productivity all the time so that you disvalue tinkering. I think about how I learned like the internet and a computer. Like my parents didn't teach me, no one sat me down. It was just, here it is, and I'm tinkering. I'm changing settings that don't have any effect, then changing settings that do have an effect, and I messed something up and I gotta fix that. But over time, you start getting the knowledge, the intuition, the experience, all of that's really valuable. And so if you feel like maybe I'm tinkering too much, you can challenge yourself and say, all right, I'm gonna try and find a very specific problem and see how I would approach it now that I've been tinkering for 6 months. But that tinkering is still really important. And I encourage people to do that across different things, not just the thing that you are already good at, but tinker in different spaces with sound, with images, with different things that AI can do, because that's how you build the skill. It's not just reading a book. There is no manual on AI. We're all talking about different things, different frameworks, all of these things. So tinkering is incredibly important. So I would say, that first and foremost, you don't downgrade that. That's building your wheelhouse.
There's an engineering principle that some of us learn early in our careers, which is let the pattern reveal itself. So you don't want to create an abstraction before you actually have a need for that abstraction. In the world of AI, though, it's so cheap to learn from that. So as you talk about tinkering, Monk, I think there's actually more value now in the tinkering than waiting for that pattern to reveal itself. Because while you're waiting, someone else is tinkering, and they can always say, I tried that, that didn't work. I went back to number 2, and I built on option number 2, and here I am with a solution that actually solves a problem. So I would say that tinkering is important. But to go back to something we talked about earlier in the panel, which is that you're responsible for both the input to AI and the output. Part of the input is defining the problem really well. And sometimes the reason we jump ahead to tinkering is we haven't truly defined the problem yet. And that's actually something you can do as a thought exercise with AI. You can literally say to it, hey, I'm trying to define the problem. Here's what I know. Challenge my thinking so that we nail the problem definition before we jump into solution mode. And so I think that those tactics are really good to implement in your workflows going forward.
And one thing I'd like to add to that, play devil's advocate with yourself, right? Because have you guys noticed with like OpenAI or Claude, you put a prompt, great job, that was a good question. I don't want to hear that. I need somebody that's going to tell me the real deal. So you should actually give it a prompt to say, hey, I don't need you to agree with everything I say. I want to have a different approach. I want you to like pit holes in what I'm putting out so that way you can test yourself. Because yeah, it sounds great. Not every idea is great. So you always want to just make sure you have another way of like, counteracting. Like, okay, this is not a really good idea. Here's where the loopholes are. You know what I mean? So something to think about.
All right, that is our time for the day. Please give it up for our incredible panelist and moderator.